If you're a lineman in charge of keeping the lights on, Granger understands that you go to great lengths and sometimes heights to ensure the power is always flowing, which is why you can count on Granger for professional-grade products and next-day delivery, so you have everything you need to get the job done. Call 1-800-GRANGER, click Granger.com, or just stop by. Granger, for the ones who get it done.
Cheers, Rockets fans. Welcome to The Logger Line, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets.
Whoa!
Sports Talk 790.
Rockets!
The Logger Line is proudly served to you by Carbox Clutch City Lager.
It is good!
Oh, yeah? Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. The Logger Line starts now.
Welcome aboard.
Welcome in to another episode of The Logger Line, as always served to you courtesy of Clutch City Lager of Carbock Brewing. I'm Ben Dubose, your host, editor of USA Today's Rockets Wire, and contributor to Sports Talk 790, official flagship radio station of your Houston Rockets. This is going to be another quick minicast episode. If you follow both myself and Paolo Alves, my usual co-host, on Twitter/X, you know that we've both been traveling in recent days. We're both getting back into the swing of things, so we're going to wait for a couple of days to do a full show, especially because we are very close to getting a better sense of who the Rockets could actually play in their first-round playoff series. That will start on Saturday the 19th or Sunday the 20th. Rockets, the 2 seed in the West, they will play the 7 seed, which will be determined by the first play-in tournament game held in the middle of next week. Regular season concludes this Sunday, play-in games in the middle of next week, and then the playoffs begin the following weekend. So Paolo and myself will be back with a full show previewing, well, I think at the end of this weekend, we'll know the 2 teams the Rockets can play, and then we'll dive in more on the specific opponent towards the end of next week once that first round series is set. This is just going to be a quick show reacting to the Rockets clinch the number 2 seed, also clinch another lottery pick in the 2025 draft, courtesy of the Phoenix Suns missing the playoffs. So I want to talk about that. I'll also give some initial thoughts as far as who the Rockets might want to play and avoid in the first round. And as they go into their final 2 games of the regular season, Friday on the road against the Lakers, Sunday at home versus Denver, I'll give you a few thoughts on proverbial rest versus rust debate and what I think Ime Udoka and the Rockets will choose to do. Anyway, let's start with the headline, which is this season is now a resounding success for the Rockets, almost no matter what. I do throw a slight asterisk on it in that if you get swept in the first round of the playoffs and you lose by 30 points a game and none of your young players look good, they all look like the Jared Allen meme, the lights were too bright. At that point, there might be a little bit of a sour taste. But at this point, and I think that's a fairly unlikely scenario, pretty much everything else is something that you'll be happy with. So as of this April 10th recording, again, Rockets have 2 games left. They are 52-28. They are locked at number 2 in the West. Realistically, they're 52-27 because the 28th loss was the one Wednesday night against the Clippers where almost no one played from the regular rotation. Jalen Green was the only starter who did, and he was on very limited minutes at just 15, with the Rockets clinching the 2 courtesy of a loss from the Lakers the previous night. You're at a point now where teams with nothing to play for will generally make sure their guys are healthy for the playoffs rather than go all out for games that don't really have any implications as far as the path ahead in the postseason. Getting guys healthy and being the best version of themselves is much more important. Touch on that a little bit in the rest versus rust debate coming up. We've said in the last couple of pods that there were multiple ways the end of the regular season could play out. First, they needed the Rockets, that is, get in the top 6. That was the goal all along. And they clinched that a week or so ago. In a strong Western Conference for a team that was 41-41 last year, still so young, that's a big achievement in and of itself. The second goal was getting in the top 4 and having home court advantage in at least the first round. They cleared that. The stretch goal, what makes the regular season an A+ if you were to grade it, would be to actually get the number 2 spot, where the Rockets have hovered this year between number 2 and number 5, and there's been lots of peaks and valleys. We know they generally peaked at least before this recent stretch in January. Then they had all those injuries. It felt like February is when they sort of bottomed out. And so they've oscillated a bit, but they've generally been in that top 6 all year. So that's why towards the bottom part was the baseline. Getting the top 4 and home court advantage was sort of the you're okay scenario. And then the resounding success scenario is that if you finish at the top of your range, which is the number 2, the only team ahead of you being an absolutely loaded Oklahoma City squad, who, by the way, you just beat. So it's not like they are completely untouchable for this Rockets team, or at least I don't think the Rockets believe the Thunder are. And there's something to be said for that. To finish at number 2 and in the top of your range, that's the best case realistic outcome. And the Rockets not only did it, but they did it with 3 games still to play. 52 wins, could be as many as 54, and quite honestly, it might have been 55 had the Rockets not taken their foot off the gas, because with the win at Golden State on Sunday night, the Rockets had gone 15-2 in their previous 17 games. Just an incredible stretch of basketball. When the Rockets needed to be at their best, they responded with some of their best ball of the entire season. And even when the schedule got more difficult, games against the Thunder and the Warriors this past weekend, they won both of those with relative ease by double digits. So it's not playoff ball just yet, but I don't think it's a stretch to say that this recent run has been playoff intensity. And to see the team respond with the focus that they did, I think it speaks well to what they are made of. I think it speaks well to the coaching staff, the culture. I think it bodes well for what they're going to do in the playoffs. And more than that, I think it speaks well to long-term what they are potentially able to build here in Houston as the Rockets try and get what has frequently been referred to as a sustainable contender. They are still in the developmental stages. They are not a full-blown contender just yet, but these are all really encouraging signs. And so to finish at number 2 in the West, you're at a point now we can reasonably say that, assuming it's not a catastrophic loss in the playoffs, it's a success no matter what. You're far ahead of schedule. There's a reason the over-under going into this year was 43.5. They have blown past every realistic expectation. And even if they go out in the first round, as long as it's competitive, look, the Western Conference is competitive. Right now, the 3 through 8 seeds, you have 6 teams, the Lakers, the Clippers, the Warriors, the Grizzlies, the Nuggets, and the Timberwolves, that are separated by 2 games with 31 and 33 losses. And so all of them are going to be at least at 48, 49 wins. A lot of them are going to be at 50 plus. This is a loaded West. And so if you go down in the first round to a 7 seed, especially if it's one where, if you draw the Warriors with Steph and Draymond, the Clippers with Harden and Kawhi, to a veteran-laden team with multiple future Hall of Famers and all-star level players, there's no shame in that. NBA history is littered with examples of teams that had to take their lumps, that didn't go immediately from rebuild. And, last year wasn't a true rebuilding year, but at 41 and 41, they were mediocre. You typically don't go from mediocre to legit contender overnight unless you do something crazy transformative, like bring in LeBron James and Chris Bosh in one off season, something of that nature. So even if the Rockets go out in the first round to a team that has a lot more proven pedigree, that has been there, done that in the playoffs before, there's no shame in that. We know the Bulls had to lose to the Pistons before they went on their dynasty in the 90s. I'm not saying the Rockets are at that level or going to be at that level. I just bring up that example to illustrate the fact that throughout NBA history, teams have usually had to take their lumps. And so at this point, with the Rockets checking all these boxes, seeing young players get better, Jalen Green and Alperen Şengün, your fourth-year guys, to lead you to the playoffs. We know what they did in March when Amen Thompson went down. We said those were the 2 spotlight guys. They delivered. We know what they did against the Thunder, combining for 65 points on peak efficiency against the best team in the West, the best defensive team in the NBA. Guys are stepping up under the bright lights. Guys are getting better. The culture is there. And even if you lose to a team that has a bit more experience. Well, you're getting that experience. That's the point of getting to the playoffs and stress testing your model. So at this point, not going to say for sure there's some outlier things that might make you feel a little bit mixed should they happen in the playoffs. But realistically, I think at this point, it's all gravy. The Rockets have had a great year, and we're going to feel really good about this team almost no matter what. At this point, the playoff run is basically the cherry on top of the sundae. And who knows, maybe they do something crazy good and it gets to an even higher level. But no matter what, when you consider where this franchise is at, when you consider how young the core is, when you look at how they're set up financially, this is a very sustainable model, and they are already well ahead of schedule. So I think it's been a fantastic year, and it's one that at this point, everything that happens from the 19th onward is just gravy in all likelihood. And I think we should also note that as strong as the Rockets have looked on the court, they also look that strong in the front office. We can certainly talk about Rafael Stone and the job he did building this team, but in terms of setting them up moving forward, yeah, let's talk about the Phoenix Suns missing the playoffs and the vision that Rafael had to do that trade for the future Phoenix assets, giving back 2 picks to the Nets last summer. That is aging extremely well. Right now, because of that swap right, you're going to be moving up from, I believe the Rockets with the 4th best record in the league would have the 27th pick. Now you can swap it to move all the way up to number 10. It's already paying dividends. And I think realistically, the way you should look at this, so the Suns right now are 35-45, and they're in the number, or they're tied for the number 9 spot in the draft lottery. That's actually where the Nets were last year when the Rockets swapped with them and moved up to get Reed Shepherd. Or no, it wasn't a swap. The Rockets had the outright pick from the Nets, but the point is the same. The Suns right now are where the Nets were a year ago. And had the Rockets not given the Nets back their picks, I don't think it's a stretch to say that the Nets would be pretty much in the same spot because they would have had no incentive to tank. Quite frankly, even trying to tank, the Nets had enough on their roster to where right now they're 26-53 and in the number 6 spot in the draft lottery. So even trying to tank, they're not at the level of like the Jazz, the Wizards, the truly awful teams. So if the Nets hadn't had their 2025 pick, if they hadn't had the path to Cooper Flag potentially, I don't think it's a stretch to say they would have won a few more games, somewhere between 30 and 35 and a bad Eastern Conference, and been right where they were a year ago at, somewhere between, let's say, 8 and 11 in the lottery standings. And that's right where Phoenix is now. So basically, it's like you didn't even give up the 2025 Brooklyn pick because the Suns are right where, in my opinion, the Nets likely would have been had you not done that trade. So basically, what you've done, the 25 angle has canceled out. So you basically gave up 1 pick in 2026 from the Nets who wouldn't have had the incentive to bottom out. And you've got 2 future picks in 27 and 29 from an awful Suns team that has no future, no pathways to get better, small market, and a 29 pick from Dallas who just lost Luka 2 months ago and looks like their future is in serious doubt as well. So you got 3 future picks, 3 of the most valuable future picks in the entire NBA for 1 26 pick from Brooklyn. That's what I think that trade comes down to now that with the 25 results in the books, I think it's fair to say that it canceled out. It came out a wash. And so that trade is looking amazing. We'll see if the Rockets use that leverage on the Suns to try and get a deal for Kevin Durant or Devin Booker in the months ahead. Maybe the Rockets don't even need to make a trade like that because they have enough internally. We've certainly seen it in recent weeks with the Rockets going 15-2 down the home stretch of this season. Maybe the Rockets don't even need to exert that leverage on the Suns, and they can just use those picks to, have a developmental pipeline to cheap role players as the roster gets more expensive in the years ahead. There's multiple ways that it can play out. But I think when you look at the Suns finishing the year with probably 35, 36 wins, the foresight by Rafael Stone to get that deal done and the way that's shaping up, as good as the Rockets look on the floor, led by Ime Udoka and these young players, Jalen Green, Amin Thompson, Alperen Şengün, all taking leaps in their development. By the way, Reed Shepherd has looked good when he's gotten opportunities. We know what he did against Oklahoma City a month ago. He did much the same thing against the Clippers on Wednesday night in LA. It's a team that looks great on the floor, but from a management perspective, Rafael Stone, some of the big picture deals that he's done and not done, the Fertittas, Tillman, and Patrick, the foresight they had to not shortcut the rebuilding process and to give Rafael Stone the latitude to implement his vision. It's a team, it's an organization that is set up for success, not just on the court, but off it as well. And I think seeing the trade with the Suns already pay dividends to the extent that it has, it should remind you of that. It's not as important as the on-court product. Everybody at Toyota Center is focused on the team, and for good reason. Finishing at number 2, you're now in line to not only avoid the Oklahoma City Thunder until at least the Western Conference Finals, and that's if they make it. You're on the opposite side of the bracket, but you're also in line to have home court advantage in multiple rounds of the playoffs. Rockets are 29-11 at home this year. They're 12-2 since the All-Star break. For a young team that you worry about their lack of experience, getting games early in playoff series at home should definitely help. For a Houston market that hasn't had playoff basketball since 2019, last time the Rockets were in the playoffs in 2020, and that was the COVID bubble year. It's been since May 2019 since you've had playoff basketball at Toyota Center, so I think the crowd should be incredible. Once we get to the 19th or 20th and playoff basketball officially starts in Houston, that should only help. Again, the focus organizationally is on the here and now, because there is a window in front of you, even if it's unlikely. If you're number 2 in a strong West, crazier things have happened than that team getting deep into the playoffs, and maybe the stars align. Maybe you get a bounce here or there. Maybe some other team has a bad injury. Crazier things have happened than a team like the Rockets doing serious damage and maybe even contending for a title this year. I don't expect it, but if you're number 2 in a strong West and you have home court advantage in multiple rounds, that's the focus. This is not a year that you can just throw aside. Opportunities like this do not always show up. The focus organizationally is on the here and now for good reason. But I think as fans, we can appreciate both the here and now and the long term. And so the juxtaposition of what the Rockets are doing themselves with the decline of the Phoenix Suns, the foresight from Rafael Stone, Tillman Fertitta, Patrick Fertitta, the GM, ownership, it should tell you that the Rockets are set up not just for the present, but for the future as well. And so it's a really good time to be a fan of the Rockets. All right. So I want to transition the rest of our discussion to who the Rockets should want to play in the first round, and also how they should play out the remainder of this season, the final 2 games this weekend against the Lakers and the Nuggets in terms of rest versus rust. I'll start with the first round discussion. So as mentioned, there are 6 teams the Rockets could conceivably play. The Lakers, the Clippers, the Nuggets, the Grizzlies, the Timberwolves, and the Warriors. That's who I'm forgetting. All between 31 and 33 losses between number 3 and number 8 in the West. And the Rockets at number 2 will play the winner of the play-in game between the 2 teams that finish at number 7 and number 8. So with 2 games left to play and all those teams separated by 2 losses or less, they're all still in the mix somehow to finish anywhere in that band. Well, there's a couple of them that can't get all the way to 3, but in terms of who can get to 7 or 8, they're all in play. Some are less likely than others. I think the Lakers in particular are not likely to drop, especially because the Lakers play the Rockets on Friday night. I think the Rockets are highly likely to be in rest mode, at least to an extent, in that game. More on that momentarily. So I think realistically, you're looking at the 5-team group between 32 and 33 losses, the ones that are really close: the Timberwolves, the Grizzlies, the Nuggets, the Warriors, and the Clippers. And so I think in terms of X's and O's, you can certainly argue for the Grizzlies. The Rockets went 3-1 against them this year. The one loss was a game they didn't have Alperen Şengün at the end of a road trip, and they lost it in the final seconds. So I think you feel good about that matchup. The Grizzlies fired Taylor Jenkins a couple of weeks ago, so there's instability in the leadership ranks there. So I think there's a lot of reasons that you should feel good about Memphis. I also think, though, that you could make a compelling case for Golden State. even though they've looked very good overall since adding Jimmy Butler at the trade deadline, the Rockets, what they did defensively the other night in San Francisco was incredible, and it's not just a one-off. The 5 games the Rockets played the Warriors this year, including 2 with Jimmy Butler, the Warriors' offensive rating, and they're usually a pretty good offensive team, would have been dead last in the entire NBA. Sunday, they scored just 90 points. Steph Curry was blanketed by Amen Thompson, who at this point looks like a first-team all-defense guy. You could even argue for Defensive Player of the Year. I think he probably won't get it in just his second year, but that's how good he's been. And the Warriors, Steph Curry, Draymond Green, they had just glowing words of praise for Amen after Sunday's game, in which he held Steph to just 3 points and 1 of 10 shooting, the lowest points in Steph's entire career in a game that he's played at least 30 minutes. An 11-time All-Star, 4-time champion, 2-time MVP, future Hall of Famer, 3 points at home on 1 of 10 shooting. That's how good the Rockets defense was. I mean, individually and then collectively, again, we've talked about this team all year. There have been peaks and valleys, but by and large, they've been a top 5 defense all year, somewhat middle of the pack offensively, although a little bit better than middle of the pack. Now they're at, I think, 11th in terms of offensive rating, 4th in defensive rating. But the defense has carried the team, and they've been especially dominant against Golden State, where, again, in 5 games against a Warriors team that's going to finish with about 50 wins, the Rockets have held them to what would be the worst offensive performance of any NBA team all year. And so I think you could argue that's a good matchup for the Rockets. I think all the long wings the Rockets have, you can throw Tari Eason into that mix as well. The veteran presence and physicality of Dylan Brooks. We know what Jabari Smith has been able to do off the bench to throw all of those guys at Steph Curry. And then in terms of the ball movement, the Rockets are a very well-coached team. They're high IQ defensively. I think that's only going to show up even more in the playoffs, and they can hone in on one opponent. So the way the Warriors play with the ball movement, the player movement, I don't think it's nearly as effective against the Rockets as it is against most teams. I think you can argue from an X's and O's perspective that that's a really good matchup for the Rockets. And if there was any mental scarring, because we know going into this year, there was a long losing streak dating back multiple years, Rockets against the Warriors. Now Houston's won 2 of the last 3 meetings against Golden State, the last one by double digits in San Francisco, and the only loss in the final 3 was a close one on night 2 of a back-to-back right before the All-Star break when the Rockets were on fumes. So the results are turning around. Really, if you looked at a couple of losses the Rockets had to the Warriors early in the year, they were pretty fluky in that the defense was fabulous. The Rockets just couldn't make a shot, many of those threes wide open. Well, now the threes are going in at a more respectable level, and the defense has stayed consistent in terms of what they've done against the Warriors, shutting down Steph Curry and the player/ball movement that defines that offense under Steve Kerr. And so I think you could argue that that might be the best matchup for the Rockets. I think, X's and O's, the one I worry about the most, and I've said before, is the Minnesota Timberwolves. They experienced the Western Conference Finals run a year ago, but more the Anthony Edwards factor, just the physicality that he plays with, the ability to take it to another level on both ends of the floor, what he can do against Jalen Green potentially. I worry about that matchup tactically the most, even though the Rockets did beat them a couple of times this season. I worry about the Warriors tactically. I'm not going to say I don't worry about them at all, but I personally put them right in the same bucket as the Grizzlies in terms of a matchup that I think on paper should be very favorable to the Rockets. But I think the 2 teams that I would ultimately go with in terms of my preferences would actually be the Grizzlies and the Nuggets. And the reason for that is the mental side of the game, which I think is even more important for the Rockets, given how the team is constructed, given the factors we were just discussing with how young this team is and the lack of experience and the fact that NBA history is littered with examples of teams that had to take their lumps in the playoffs. The Grizzlies and Nuggets are in fairly unprecedented situations of being playoff teams that went through coaching changes in the last 10 games of the regular season. And look, I'm not going to say that those organizations made mistakes in doing that, because if you determine that, the Grizzlies with Taylor Jenkins, the Nuggets with Michael Malone, if you've come to the conclusion that that's not the guy for the future, then okay, I can understand the case that you should get data in a different construct in terms of how players are used. And maybe you catch lightning in a bottle in that you're putting in an interim coach that other teams haven't seen before. You're using guys in different ways. And maybe in the short term, it benefits you. Maybe it's a shot in the arm. Maybe the team rallies around it. Okay, you can argue that. And I'm not going to say that those teams made a mistake. There could be something to that. However, I think what those moves do, even if they are justifiable, those are putting out all cap statements that the most powerful people in those organizations, and I highly doubt the owners, the GMs did those moves without having at least some knowledge of how the power brokers on the team itself, guys like Nikola Jokic, John Morant, felt about things. You don't do those types of transformative moves in the final month of the year with 10 games or less left unless you think that it's not going to end well. You don't have a lot of self-confidence in the way the team is currently built if you make a move of that magnitude. And that's not to say it was a mistake. Again, I think you can justify it. But in terms of matching up with the Rockets specifically and the lack of experience for most of this group on the big stage, I think not having a disadvantage in terms of the mental side of the game going into the playoffs could be really big. Because if you're playing a team like the Grizzlies or the Nuggets, those are teams that you could get potentially into Cancun mode pretty early. If you were to get hot in those first two games at home, ride the emotion of what should be a crazy home crowd. We know how the Rockets play defensively and on the glass when it comes to rebounding, when they are energized, when they are motivated. If the Rockets can hit them with a left hook early in those series, those are the types of teams that might fade. And conversely, if it goes the other way and the Rockets are not quite themselves, maybe they have a bad shooting night because the lights are a little bright and they're not used to the stage. Well, even if a team like the Grizzlies or the Nuggets wins a road game one or a road game two and steals home court advantage early in that first round series, it's not going to undo all the baggage that's been built up from making a transformative change like that. By the way, the Nuggets moved out their GM as well. You're not going to undo all of that with one road win in the first round of a playoff series. So even if the Rockets fall behind the 8 ball early, it's easier for them to strike back and win a road game or two, game 3, game 4, and take back home court advantage and get back where you need to be. Those teams are mentally fragile. Even if there's big names like Nikola Jokic, a multi-time MVP, like John Morant, a multi-time All-Star, those are teams that, for this season at least, don't have a lot of self-belief. And so you can rattle them very easily. Ideally, you do it right out of the chute. But if it takes a couple of games, I think you can easily get back in the series because those are not teams that are going to be particularly confident in terms of their ability to go out and beat you. They won't be mentally beaten. They'll try. But I think the Rockets, especially if they get off to a good start, and conversely, even if they need to make up ground because the experience haunts them early in a series, they're not going to be at a massive disadvantage on the mental side. As opposed to, I mentioned the Warriors being a good X's and O's matchup. I think they are. But the more I think about it, I don't want to draw them in the playoffs because I think the culture of that team, Steve Kerr, Steph Curry, Draymond Green, now you throw in Jimmy Butler as well. That's a team that I don't care who they play. I don't care what their record is. They're not going to be fazed by the moment. They've been there, done that. They believe that they're going to figure it out when it matters most. And against a Rockets team that's young and hasn't done that before, that's the kind of team where you can be at a disadvantage, especially if things don't go your way early in a series. And then it can be very hard to beat a team like that on the road. I think the same can apply with the Clippers and the Timberwolves. I think the Timberwolves, for the most part, have the bones of a team that went to the Western Conference Finals last year. They're coached very well by Chris Finch. They had to take their lumps this year because of the trade right before training camp, sending Karl-Anthony Towns to the Knicks for Julius Randle and DiVincenzo, but they figured it out as the season has moved along. And then the team itself, the way they play, certainly Anthony Edwards and Naz Reid, but most of the role players from last year are still around. They're a team that has a lot of pedigree. They've got good coaching. They've got the experience. There's a culture there. The Clippers, Ty Lue, Kawhi Leonard, even James Harden. There's a culture there. They trust one another, and they've played well. After beating the Rockets the other night, they're now 16-3 in their last 19 games. Even if you want to throw out the game against the Rockets and not really consider that because the Rockets weren't really trying, they were in rest mode. Well, 15-3 in the previous 18. They're playing better. To me, those are the types of teams. And if somehow the Lakers were to fall apart and to fall into that mix, which I don't think is likely. They're a unique case, but I just think that, certainly they're high on JJ Redick. And I think just the LeBron and Luka factor, you're probably not going to see those guys get rattled. But that's, again, I don't expect to see the Lakers in the mix for 7 or 8. I think you're looking at teams like the Clippers, the Wolves, the Warriors, the Nuggets, and the Grizzlies. And to me, it's the Nuggets and the Grizzlies, probably the Grizzlies at the top of that list, because I think the Grizzlies check both boxes. It's a good X's and O's matchup for the Rockets, and I think it's a good mental matchup for the Rockets. The Nuggets, it's a good mental matchup because of, the coaching change, the lack of belief, the questionable self-confidence. Matchup, maybe, but they came into Houston and won a couple of weeks ago, and the Rockets did not look like they had many answers for Jamal Murray, so I don't think it's quite as favorable as the Grizzlies would be. So I would rank the Grizzlies as my preferred matchup, Nuggets probably second preferred, and then the teams that would worry me, not saying the Rockets can't beat them, but the Warriors especially, and also the Clippers and the Timberwolves, teams that have established veteran stars, established coaches, established cultures. Those are the ones where a Rockets team that's fairly green could be at a little bit of a disadvantage. Not that they couldn't overcome it, but I think the story for the Rockets in the playoffs, really their first trip for most of these guys, is going to be about how they handle the moment. And so playing immediately in round one against one of those teams that has a lot of experience and established culture, that knows what they're doing and doesn't have the cloud hanging over them the way the Grizzlies and Nuggets do because of all the organizational changes in recent weeks. Those are the ones where the Rockets' relative inexperience could be more of a factor. And so it's not that the Rockets couldn't win those series. I'm not saying I would predict them to lose those series, but they would worry me a little bit more. So that's why basically I have 2 tiers. I have the Grizzlies and Nuggets teams I would most want to play, and then the Warriors, Clippers, and Timberwolves in the lower tier. I think I would actually, I've said this a few times, I would probably prefer playing the Timberwolves the least. I just think that's a tough matchup. I trust what they've done in the past. And the Warriors and Clippers, even though they are veteran-laden, again, the Rockets have had results. We know what the Rockets have done defensively against Golden State. Against the Clippers, the Rockets went 3-0 when they were trying. Now, I know they didn't have Kawhi Leonard in those games, but I think the matchup is pretty good. Paolo's talked about, you can check out our archives, why it's fairly favorable to the Rockets. Zubac isn't going to play Şengün off the floor. So I would probably lean to Minnesota as my least favorite matchup, then the Warriors and Clippers, and then the Nuggets and Grizzlies being the teams that I would most want to play amongst the realistic options. And again, you're not going to, even if there's an upset in the play-in tournament and some team in that, most likely the Kings and the Mavs, well, actually they both clinched because, the Suns are now mathematically eliminated. So even if the Kings or the Mavs, the teams that are in the 9 and 10 slots, if one of them was to somehow get into the playoffs, it would be as the 8 seed. So they are not in consideration to play the Rockets. The Rockets would play one of those teams in the 3 through 8 range in the standings because 7 through 8 is going to play to determine the 7. And that will be the team playing the Rockets on Saturday the 19th or Sunday the 20th in game 1 of the first round. Now, as far as how the Rockets will play things over the next few days to get ready for that first round playoff series, you can argue for rest and you can argue for rust from the standpoint of playing guys to avoid rust. And Ime Udoka said that is a factor in comments from the Clippers game. He said you don't want to be too rusty, and playing some of your guys in these final 2 games so that the momentum they built up lately, again, 15-2 in 17 games prior to clinching the number 2, doesn't go away by the time you open up the playoffs on the 19th or 20th. There's arguments you can make on both sides. But for me, I lean much more to rest. I think this is a team, we know when they struggled the most in February, they were not healthy. That was the story. And so you've got guys with nagging injuries, Fred and men with ankle issues. You've got Şengün off and on with his back. These are situations where if you have the luxury to give guys a week or so off before the playoffs, or mostly a week or so off, you can potentially reap the rewards. And in the last pod, I talked about how getting the best version of Fred VanVleet is critical for this team. He hasn't been healthy for the majority of this season. He's now 31 years old as an undersized point guard in the NBA. There's a lot of mileage. The one game where it looked like he had some juice was against the Thunder last week, and that was one of the Rockets' best games of the season, won by 14. The headliners were Jalen and Şengün, but Fred, in 37 minutes, had 13 points, 6 assists, no turnovers, made 5 of 9 overall, and 3 of 7 shots from three-point range, 43%. So the Rockets got the best version of Fred VanVleet, and they beat the NBA's best team by 14 points. When the Rockets compare what they do defensively and these young guys that are getting better, like Jalen, like Şengün, like Ime, with an efficient version of Fred VanVleet, something closer to what they had last season, his first in Houston, that's when they go from good to great. That's when they become potentially lethal. And we should note that Fred VanVleet took off the previous game against the Jazz. So he had not played in 4 days. There was a gap between the previous Monday game against the Lakers when he was terrible, shot just 2 of 14, didn't play again until Friday against the Thunder. And then he came back fresh and efficient. And so with Fred in particular, he's someone I think you should be very mindful of the mileage you put on him down the home stretch of this year. And if you can get those ankles healthy to where he's feeling pretty stringy by the 19th to the 20th, that can be a huge variable for this team. But I just think overall, there might be a couple of guys, especially the younger ones that don't really have any injuries, that you play out there to build continuity. But for the most part, there's a reason why historically in the NBA, there's not a strong correlation with how teams play in the final couple of weeks of the regular season and what happens in the playoffs. Because the rust angle is already baked in based on the fact that there's a week off between the regular season finales on the previous Sunday and the start of the playoffs on the next Saturday and Sunday. And especially if you're in the top 2 seeds and you're playing a play-in tournament team that had to play at least one game in the middle of the week, which the Rockets at number 2 are going to be doing, you were already at something of a rust disadvantage in that it's not normal to go a week or more without basketball during the NBA season. That typically doesn't happen. So there is some concern with rust, but I would argue that it would be there no matter what. And NBA history shows us that it could be there no matter what. Now, it doesn't have to be. We can look back to, one example I would point to in 2018, when the Rockets went 65-17, they clinched the 1 seed in the West with like 2 weeks left. And they went out and were dominant in the first 2 rounds of the playoffs, both 4-1 gentlemen's sweeps. So it doesn't have to translate. I know that was a 65-win team, but the point is, even viewing it through that lens, they went out and dominated those series, won by huge margins, especially early on. So in terms of overcoming potential rust and trying to get back to the peak version of yourself in the regular season, which it felt like the Rockets were in the second half of March and the very beginning of April, which culminated with those 2 wins against the Thunder and the Warriors last weekend. That was always going to be a little bit of a factor based on the week or more gap between the end of the regular season and the start of the playoffs. Not going to act like there's no nuance and that it can't be made worse. So because of that, I think I agree with what Ime said, which is basically they'll play all out in one of those 2 final games against the Lakers and the Nuggets, probably not both. I would agree with that. I think you want to have at least one tune-up game, at least a partial tune-up game, depending on the score. Maybe they don't go all out in the fourth quarter. Yeah, there's something to be said for that. But I think in the bigger picture, rest is far more important because you're going to have to contend with rust factors no matter what. That's already baked in. So you may as well focus on having the best version of your team physically. And especially with some of these nagging injuries, Fred is the headliner, but Amen's had his own ankle issues, Şengün with the back, Jabari with the ankle and the groin. We know the situation with Tari that's been off and on all year in his first year coming off of leg surgery. Steven Adams is someone they didn't list as out, but clearly in his first year off of leg surgery, they're being mindful of his minutes as well. There are a lot of guys on that roster that you shouldn't be like super worried about, but that you can't be unconcerned with either. And so with that in mind, especially if you're already going to be contending with rust to a degree, that makes me prioritize rest much more. Not entirely. I do think that at least for, let's say, 3/4 of one game, it makes sense to give them at least a trial run. But I think by and large, rest is a much bigger factor. And then you can use your practices next week. And this is a situation where the Rockets talk about the stay ready crew and guys that don't play a lot, but certainly can in a pinch towards the end of the bench. Guys in your second and even third units. all the way down your bench, like Jock Landale, Jeff Green, Jayshon Tate. Have competitive practices. Go out and take those midweek scrimmages Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday of next week at your brand new training facility. Use those as the tune-up. Let guys get right over these next few days, then build them back up right before the playoffs, the few days immediately preceding it. To me, that's the play. You've got the depth that you can have competitive practices. You can get guys sharp without having to expose them to the risk of games. And it's not even so much exposing them to the risk of games. It's more allowing them to rest, have a few days to let these soft tissue injuries heal without it being right before the playoffs. Because if you give guys a lot of days off right before the playoffs, that's where you can run into perhaps some conditioning issues or the jump shots are off. But if you give them rest days now, then you can take the practices in the days immediately before the playoffs much more seriously, go more all out there. And then from a conditioning standpoint, in terms of how guys are shooting, how they're feeling, they're much more ready to go. So it's for that reason, more than an injury risk per se, that I would lean to using this week, the majority of it at least, to let these guys heal up, let those nagging issues that may have flared up over, the Rockets have had to play pretty aggressively to win 15 of 17 games. Heal up now, for the most part. You can have one game where you actively pursue it, especially if maybe you think it's to your advantage to beat the Lakers or Nuggets. Perhaps you can chase that. But for the most part, I think you prioritize rest right now, and then you build guys up more aggressively in the days right before the playoffs so that they're chomping at the bit and ready to go come Saturday or Sunday of next week whenever things open up. You're at home at Tudors into the 2-7 series in the first round of the West. Anyway, that'll do it for today's show. And again, we'll have more content in the days ahead. Both Paolo and myself are getting back from our recent travels. We're getting our legs under us. We're also waiting for more clarity in terms of who the Rockets may play in the first round. So when we're a bit more rested and we have more clarification on who the Rockets are actually going to play, we'll have full shows. We may have interviews. We'll have more content to get you ready for the playoffs. And of course, we'll have a lot of content during the playoff run as well. These are just some initial thoughts with the Rockets within the last 48 hours, having clinched the number 2 seed in the West, getting more clarification on the short-term future. These are just my thoughts on the state of play right now, and then we'll expand upon them more with Paolo, with other guests, as we get more intel as well about who the Rockets are likely to play once their playoff run begins next weekend. Anyway, that'll do it for today. But if you want more content before those next shows, the best place to get it is on Twitter/X. You can follow me at Ben Dubose. And you can also follow the show at The Logger Line. If you go to Logger Line's link tree in the bio, you can find links to certainly our distribution partners, Apple, Google, Spotify. If you've not already subscribed, left a positive review, please do. That will help us. But also, you've got links to friends, sponsors, partners of the program, USA Today's Rockets Wire, Carbach Brewing, Sports Talk 790. Hit up those links, and you can enjoy their content as well. Okay, with the plugs complete, I will adjourn for today. Again, I'm Ben Dubose, editor of USA Today's Rockets Wire, contributor to Sports Talk 790, official flagship radio station of the team. As always, thanks for listening, and please come back soon for more new episodes of The Logger Line. Go Rockets.